That's fine.
We're going to go ahead and get started. We have 2 meetings scheduled for tonight, one from 5 till 6 to continue our discussions of the municipal code recodification that we started a while back, and then also from 6 till 7 we're going to have a budget workshop where staff is going to kind of go through the process that they've been working on to so far with respect to putting the budget together for 2014. So, roll call.
Alderman Harper. Alderman Nguyen.
Here.
Alderman Robertson. Alderman Kramer.
Present.
Alderman Tui.
Here.
Alderman Leahy.
Here.
Alderwoman Manister. Alderwoman Saunders.
Here.
Okay. And now what I'm going to do is, with respect to the recodification, is maybe, Bola, do you want to give us kind of an update where we are and our...
Yes, Mayor. Thank you.
Aren't you glad I did that?
Staff has been working on the code for several months, years actually, and I believe that we've completed review working with Sullivan Publication and are ready to present it to the Board of Alderman. We've had an initial meeting, and this would be the second meeting. Also, last fall, in anticipation of the meetings that the Board of Alderman would have, we asked Planning and Zoning to start review of Title IV, Title V, so that their recommendation would be ready and timely for us to present to the Board of Aldermen. And that is what we're hoping to do tonight. The first of several meetings regarding the recodification process involves Title IV, and then we'll be bringing back Title V at the next meeting. And in the weekly city administrator report, we outline that there will be a separate meeting to discuss fire, parks and recreation, and court, then a subsequent meeting, public works and police, and then the last meeting, administration. In your packets, we have a memo that Ellen prepared that provides an overview of the conversation, the discussion tonight. Ellen, would you like to cover your memo?
Sure.
Just for, and again, yeah, just for the record, if when you're speaking at the table, if you could use that mic so the recorder picks it up. And for the record, Alderwoman Manister is now present. Okay, sorry.
Sure. Title IV encompasses the subdivision, the sign code, and the zoning code. And this is what Planning and Zoning Commission reviewed because it's under their purview per Chapter 89 of state statute. They completed their review. They started their review in October of last year, and they completed it in March of this year. And you should have the draft review notes from Sullivan, the March 13th deliberation matrix, which includes all the comments that we received from Planning and Zoning Commission, the decision, the final decision on how to handle those comments and questions that they had. And then also I forwarded the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes and the subcommittee meeting summaries in case it was helpful just to give some context to their deliberation. Title V is not part of P&Z's review, but it is within the Planning and Development Department, so that will be at a future meeting. So this evening, this is just for Title IV for our department.
Okay. And so these were the recommended changes basically by staff originally or input from P&Z members, and then have been reviewed. I guess I will open it up for discussion at this point, how you would like to proceed, or does anybody have any concerns with these changes? Alderman Kramer? That's all right.
Sorry.
Nope, that's okay.
I guess my question, Your Honor, is we've got this matrix which goes through some of the concerns raised by planning and zoning and or others, maybe staff, but there were, in the previous document that we received, I guess it was the draft review of the code, there were some other topics that were brought up in that printout that didn't appear in the matrix. So are we to not talk about those?
Now, I was going to say the changes to Title IV consist of what's in the draft review, which it tracks all of the changes that Sullivan recommended,
Okay.
and then staff or city attorney response, and then what the final outcome was. Those are tracked in the draft review. And that was completed before the Title IV was sent to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Planning and Zoning Commission is another layer, and they didn't comment on every single change. They went through Title IV, and the members had their comments and questions about Title IV are tracked in the deliberation matrix.
So just as one example, in the draft that we got under Title IV, a topic that we happen to know about, the definition of the word condominium. In the draft, it points out that the state statute definition differs from our code. And then looking in our code, it looks like it is different. But are we making the change already?
That's a question I had too. I was reviewing this, preparing for the meeting, and it doesn't say what the outcome was. So we may need to check with Sullivan as to they recommend that state statute defines the term as, and they quote that, but it doesn't say what the final outcome was of that definition, whether it was changed or not. And I guess I could have looked. Let's see.
No.
So in a situation like that, where it was on the draft, but it didn't show up on the matrix, is it up to us then to go through and find those items that didn't show up on the matrix but were in the draft that need to be changed?
No.
No.
Well, go ahead, Alan.
Well, I was going to say it's in the draft review, all the changes for the Title IV.
The draft is where all the changes are.
Okay.
What Alan was saying is when P&Z went through it, this matrix is what they questioned or wanted to review after they went through it. So the draft is still where all the changes are coming from. Okay, so if you had but we need to have our definitions and the same as the state statutes. They supersede
Right.
us anyway, so
It
that
looks
may
like
have
they
just
did-
been overlooked.
It looks like they didn't change it, but there's just not a note to say that it was left the same. It's very similar, the two definitions, so it may have been that it was so similar. I'm not
It was
really
close
sure
enough.
That it was close enough, because if you look at in the draft review, if you look at what they have in quote marks as the state statute definition, it's very similar to what is in our draft codification. It's just not exactly the same. A couple words are different, but
Okay.
So how do you handle something like that? What's the final?
I think we need clarification from Sullivan, because it should say something like, per city attorney definition was similar enough, it remained the same.
Okay.
Something like that. We would just need clarification as to what the
Okay.
rationale was for that action.
Thank you.
Alderwoman's, or you want specifically to this first?
Well, if I may stay
Yeah,
to
'cause,
this topic, it's my understanding eventually the Board of Alderman either approves and adopts the revised code as written. So whichever definition comes through on the draft gives me an understanding as how one moved to the other to change. But when the day you ask us to decide to vote to approve or not approve this code, whatever we've approved in this final version of the code becomes whatever the approved document becomes.
Right.
The problem
Thus-
is, in this case, it asked the question, but there's no answer.
The answer is in your book, the potential revised code. It gives you the definition that they're asking, do you, the city of Brentwood, accept as your definition for condominium in this case?
It just doesn't give the rationale, like why was it not
Just
changed?
gets me to this. Now, the draft gives you the bridge as to how you got from one version to another. But if we approve the code, that's what we're approving, so
Right.
that's exactly what you're looking for as to the final answer. I don't know that you have to go back to the Sullivan or to the city attorney and say which definition is the right definition. It's whatever we put in the final code.
Well, no, because if our code does not comply, if our definition was completely wrong,
Right.
and the state statute said a condominium was, I'm just gonna make this up, but they said a condominium is, a building of 2 units or more, housing units attached, but in the state statute, it says a condominium is a building with 6 units or more, family units attached, then that would supersede our definition and ours would not comply.
We can be more restrictive.
Okay,
We
then do it
cannot
the
be-
opposite.
we cannot be
Then do
less
it the-
restrictive.
Then say it the
Yes.
opposite.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just using that
Yeah.
as an example. You're right. We can
Yeah.
be more restrictive, but
Restrictive.
not less, right.
Which would then justify the definition that's currently in the book is a little bit more restrictive than the state statute at this point.
Okay, and they may have said that's okay.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Alderman Saunders?
Can I ask Alderman Kramer, where are you finding that in the draft review, just so I?
This is this,
Oh,
The
just
draft that
this-
we had
That
at
we
the
had last-
previous meeting
That was at
that,
February.
Okay, it's not the big,
and I'm very sorry, there
Yeah.
are no page numbers, but it's 400.020, which is the zoning portion, the definitions in Title IV. And one of the definitions that, of course, caught my eye was condominium.
right.
I noticed the
Right.
definition in our code here is different from what's in the draft.
Okay, but this draft review that I have, it's the same as in the book. So there were multiple draft reviews as they were coming up. And I thought, wasn't this the final one, Bolo? That's
It
the
is.
130, this big document?
Yes.
And in this one here,
Well-
the final draft review, the definitions are the same, condominium and this one. They
Which is
did three,
different
there
from
were
the state
three
statute.
additions coming up to the final.
that's what Tom's
That's
saying.
different
It's
from the state statute.
Oh, okay.
That's where the question was coming in, is it,
Okay, where did you see though, that, did you look up the state statute? Or where
It's,
do you see
it's
that
called out
evidence?
in the draft review that we got, that we received.
Huh, but
And
it's
Trying to find out was, it didn't show up in the matrix, and it's not in the code that we have currently in place. So in order for it to get from our draft to the code, do we ourselves have to say we prefer the state statute, or we're okay with what's written in the code currently?
We-
Okay, and I guess what I'm coming from is I use the final draft review, do you know what I mean? And it's not called out, so I guess.
Maybe that's a concern.
well,
Ah,
here's
okay.
what I
Well,
was.
Anyway, I understand though,
Yeah.
it needs, as long as it's in conformity, I mean, since you deal with condominiums and you're familiar, does that definition seem reasonable or consistent
I
with what you?
personally like the state statute better,
Okay,
but I'm willing to listen to an attorney tell me that what's written is okay.
yeah, I think it's a valid
just
question to go back.
If I could, in looking at the actual draft we got is in the big book, comparing the state statute to this, they're saying the same thing two different ways. The ordinance we have is consistent with the state statute, but it is not worded verbatim. I think either definition's acceptable. It's still, in effect, it still says that the unit owners still have to have ownership of the common areas. It's a matter of which words you choose to say that.
Can you read the state one, just?
I'm assuming that in this summary of the variances, the state statute defines a condominium, real estate portions of which are designated for separate ownership and the remainder of which is designated for common ownership solely by the owners of those portions, the portions being the individual units. And what our ordinance says, or in the proposed code that was sent to us, it defines it as real estate portions of which are designated for common ownership solely by owners of those portions. Same thing, worded differently. And that says it is not a condominium unless the undivided interests in the common elements are vested in the unit owners.
Okay.
So
My-
I
the only
believe
reason
the
I brought it
language
up-
is consistent with the state statute. It does not quote it verbatim. Either definition, I think, is acceptable.
Only reason I brought it up is because right after what's in the draft, it says this language differs somewhat from the language used herein. And so that's why it's helpful to listen to our attorney.
And again, I mean, I think what we're saying is you could use either one. And so what I would suggest, maybe right now, so that we can, because if we file, let's at least discuss the matrix today, because the overriding is what you're looking at, the final draft. But these were the concerns, or these were the issues that P and Z looked at specifically.
Yeah.
And if anybody had any specific questions to this portion of what P and Z reviewed in chapter chapter 4, right? So, Alderwoman Saunders.
Yeah, I have some areas, do you know what I mean? It looks like I have these tabs, it's just for me, education, not all these questions. But I have just a few sections that I wanted to focus on, and they're not necessarily in the matrix. I read their answers. You know what I mean? Is it okay to go that way, or do you want to just follow?
Well,
I'll bring those
does
in.
anybody have any questions with respect to the matrix first?
I do.
let's,
Okay,
can we,
then I'm
yeah,
fine
and then
with
we
that.
can get,
I'm
because
fine with
then
that.
we're kind of going to build
Okay, I
up.
just
So,
wanna make
Alderman
sure.
Kramer?
Yes, Your Honor, it seems like the matrix, P and Z and/or staff is asking us to at least contemplate this definition of family.
I think we've made that change, but go ahead.
Yes, we have made the change.
They proposed
What
the
page is that?
changes, page 3 of the matrix.
Yep.
And it appears as though Stephanie is okay with the definitions. But my question is that for purposes of occupancy restrictions, we had the definition of family as no more than 3 unrelated persons in the same household. Is that changed now by this definition?
It would be changed, yes.
So, by this definition of family, so long as you did not exceed the number of persons allowed per room,
Yes.
you could potentially still have them all as a family.
Yes, that's correct. Planning and zoning the members were concerned about our definition being too restrictive given today's changes in, family makeup and that sort of thing.
Okay?
Hmm. Yeah.
So, there's an issue there.
I would have
Perhaps.
to agree. Going back a little bit, I think I remember I was in high school when this was an issue with a residents in Ladue who weren't married, and they were trying to say they had to move out of Ladue or something. But it was upheld in court that we could not force unmarried people, that they could live together.
was my
And so, I knew that, but I wasn't going to say anything. So anyway, but and to have 3, I guess, is here's the way the concern I see. We've had a couple of instances in the last couple of years where we've had a particular landlord who has tried to subdivide houses and put additional rooms in and then rent out rooms individually to people. And has had, could have, 5 or 6 people living in the house that are unrelated just because he's put in a wall in his bedroom kind of thing. So I kind of have a concern with that. I mean, I'm just speaking that we don't have that control over non-related people. We don't have any frat houses, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's kind of a different
Your Honor, if we
issue.
have a 4-bedroom house, for example, and you're allowed 2 per bedroom, you could have 8
Yes.
in a single-family house on a regular street here in Brentwood with 8 cars or lots of other things going on that maybe the neighbors in the past weren't exposed to. And I think it's a question that certainly needs to be discussed.
Yeah, I that's why I'm bringing it up. I kind of have the same concern. I don't like the car argument because you can have I'll use a family of 5 that has 5 cars. So, I mean, today that's just a kind of a norm of our society to have, almost for every person in the house a car when they get to that age. So, I don't know that parking is as much, I mean, it's an issue, but I don't know how we can control that. But I just have it from, well, Alan, I guess my concern, do we have other ways of limiting that kind of occupancy? And I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. How did we stop them already? Was it because of the
Definition.
I thought it was the square footage of the bedrooms or something.
Well,
Was that limited?
I don't know.
There's one that said you can't have that you can't use your home for boarding home or purposes. Isn't
Right.
that one
This says not including group quarters such as dormitories, fraternities, sororities, motels, hotels, rooming houses, or boarding houses. So it says you cannot use them in that way
Right.
in the definition. But I don't know which one you're talking about. There was
A gentleman, he's over on Salem, is one, and he owned another house on over in Ward 1, I think, at one point too, and they had tried the same thing. We found out about it because he was advertising the additional rooms on Craigslist.
Oh, okay.
So housing is actually is probably last time was when you're out of maternity leave.
Okay.
We went over and stopped him from. He didn't have any building permits. He was trying to put additional rooms over on the house in Salem, and he had told his renters, who was very honest with us, that he said he wants to put 4 more people in here and rent out the rooms to him. He was taking out the kitchen for one thing and making it into a bedroom, so they wouldn't have had any utility, any
And it mentions as a
appliances.
single nonprofit housekeeping unit sharing a common kitchen facility. I mean, the definition, I think,
covers that.
this was completed after I left, but I really wasn't in favor of changing the definition of family just because I think the tried and true is over and above security for the city, I think. But the P&Z members did have a good point that it would, I can't remember any specific examples. I don't know if you were.
I think there was a member of the P&Z who felt that based on the old definition, him and his family, or people that have now become his family, wouldn't have been allowed to live in Brentwood under the old definition. And he thought it needed to be a little bit more embracing.
But why couldn't it
I
be
guess.
3 unrelated? And I guess, I mean, that would mean, somebody that, maybe a boyfriend, girlfriend that have
Child.
kids together, they
Yeah.
could still live in a house together, and they could even have another person there.
Unless she had children
But they would be related then.
and then he had children from his marriage. So if they were living together and they both had children from like a
But they
separate.
would all be related. I mean, the kids would be related to one of them.
That's
so.
true. That is true.
Brady,
I think that may have been didn't that sound like the example that that person used?
Yeah, because I think
Yeah.
the husband, the wife had kids, and the husband, boyfriend, girlfriend at that time, did not have any kids together.
Yeah, but the husband would count as one, the girlfriend would count as one, and the kids would be
Count.
part of that family. So that would
Should be related to
within-
her or
Right.
him,
Kids.
even if
Yeah.
they're from a prior marriage.
Right.
That's true.
So that wouldn't be an issue in that case, and they could even have one more if they want. So, yeah. So I just wondering, I would think if we limited it to 3 for a single-family home, that it would be,
non-related.
non-related
Non-related.
in a single-family home.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, Lee has something he wants to say, but
Well,
Alderman.
It doesn't specifically, except I just want to tell you what I'm feeling right now. Came on the board in 77. Life was different. Family was different. It was easier to decide issues. Family's breaking apart. We all know that. Your job ahead, because this is my last term, your job ahead is going to be more difficult. Be ready that you're going to have a lot more difficulty than you face now. As a family disintegrates, a nation disintegrates. That's the bulk, and that's the mainstay of the whole country is the family. My heart goes out. I certainly would be praying for the people that come on after me. I'm glad I had a chance to live and serve when I didn't have some of the problems you face. I'm not trying to be doomsday, because I'm not. I'm a very positive person. But I'm just trying to say, I don't know how you answer these, because, see, once you leave what God said, and that's my opinion, you're out there on your own, folks. Bless you. I'll pray for you.
Thanks, Lee.
Your Honor.
Yes.
I, just as a point of discussion, I would be willing myself to expand, in keeping with the planning and zoning's conversation, to expand beyond 3 unrelated persons. But I don't know that I'm willing to go to 2 persons per bedroom on a 4-bedroom house to 8 people. For example, if we went to 5, that might allow for some different circumstances that exist in a day like today that didn't exist maybe 20 years ago. But what you said, to have 2 different unmarried people that came from different marriages with 2 kids apiece going into the same house, is apparently allowable under, I think, the old code and the proposed new code. But the separate idea of having unrelated roomers or boarders or college students or whatever going into a house, if there are enough bedrooms, and if it's allowable by way of occupancy restrictions on that measure, the number of people, I'd personally be willing to live with 5 if they could otherwise go. Other people may have different views.
I'm looking at page 488 of the proposed
Yeah.
new code.
Right.
I do not have a problem with the verbiage that's been submitted there, which is different than what is submitted on page 3 of the matrix.
Yes.
And I prefer what's written. the four
Can you
on
read
page-
that?
A family, an individual or married couple, and the children thereof, and no more than 2 other persons related directly to the individual or married couple by blood or marriage, or a group of not more than 3 persons, excluding servants, not related by blood or marriage, living together as a single housekeeping unit in a dwelling unit.
I want to know when I get my service. Need some help.
That was in the day when they had houses where there were actually servants' quarters in the
Yes.
houses, meant for servants.
Back staircases.
Isn't that what that one shed out there is? But no. And Lee, I agree with you. As you deteriorate from the family unit, you create more problems than you've solved.
Got him right here.
So children aren't included.
Yes, children are.
Yes.
Were you saying they can only have 2 kids?
No. Individual and married couple and the children thereof. And 2 other.
2 other.
So it doesn't say how many kids I can have. As long as they're related blood-wise, we're acceptable. That allows me to have whatever size house in Brentwood I need for my family. It's the concept of this group living in a unit as to how do you define them.
It's really the unrelated people that,
That creates the extra heartache.
But in this definition, it's kind of what I said, that would be 3.
If there is no
It's-
marriage
right.
or blood relation, then the group of not more than 3.
Right.
Yes,
to agree on that.
excluding servants.
I'm proposing.
Write that down.
Yeah, write this day and time down.
I think we've agreed on 2 meetings in a row, Andy. That's,
We're getting better. I'm glad to see you coming around.
Even Stephanie Carr's note in the matrix says that it is very broad, the proposal by planning and zoning, and I
Right.
agree with her. It's very broad.
right.
I am willing to strike a balance, but maybe there's no other support for that.
Okay.
It is part of the matrix, and I guess they're asking for us to make a decision on it.
Alderman Saunders.
I just have a question, and I know, that just because others, but I am curious, did we look at how other cities are defining family currently? I just always,
I didn't
Sometimes
before I
think.
left.
I
I'm-
meant to get on a couple
yeah.
websites, but I just ran out of time.
I know that our definition with the 3, no more than 3, is pretty standard, but I'd have to look again, or look at other cities to see.
And really, it comes down, I would just say that we can always poll and do all these other things, but it really comes down to what we do as a
Right.
community. So I don't want to get hung up on, polling other cities every time we have a decision to make. So I would agree with Alderman Lay. I think, that the definition that was proposed, that it was a good one. I think it does address a concern that the one P&Z resident had, and maybe he didn't interpret it that way, but I'm sure that it does, right?
The existing.
Yeah, the one,
In
the
the
one
book.
that's in the, right. So right now, that's the way it's going to say. We don't really need to take any action. Lee?
I just need to say one more thing, and that's positive, and that is, as long as we have good board members like we have, we got a chance.
Thanks, Lee.
And a good mayor. Don't leave you.
Okay.
So, Your Honor, then that particular item, we don't have to do anything?
Well, again, the
It'll
matrix
stay in
was,
there.
right.
The one in the
Procedurally,
book.
The
will
existing code.
they have
Yes.
to change Planning and Zoning Commission's vote? They voted for that text amendment, though.
Yeah.
That's what I'm wondering procedurally, if it would, when you actually vote on it, if you would need to,
But they voted for a text amendment as a recommendation, but if we have it, doesn't mean we have to accept that recommendation.
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
So if we just leave it the way it is here and adopt it, then it would become the
That'd be
code.
fine.
I think
If they voted as their
We have to
recommendation,
have a supermajority.
we have to have a supermajority.
Right.
They can make a recommendation to the board without a vote, and then the board can vote as a simple majority, as I understand our code. But if they're voting, and I didn't realize they took a vote in order to search things through, to make the
I think
recommendation
that's
onto the
just
board.
how they processed the review.
Yeah,
Right.
it's, they're required to make a recommendation on the recodification, and that was their,
So if we wished, we have 2 ways of doing it. We can either make an amendment when the whole code comes to us, in which we can vote from the board side to amend the code, either showing their terminology or putting our own in and vote the amendment up or down as it stands, or we have to vote to accept their chapter changes with a supermajority to either accept or override it.
Yeah, either way, if it's Title IV, P and Z has to have a say. So if their recommendation now is to include this different definition of family, I think that the Board of Aldermen would need to
Have a supermajority.
have a supermajority, since it is a text amendment, to override it, the particular item.
Frank, are we,
I'm not sure exactly the context in which this came up before P and Z. Typically, what they would do is submit to the board individual recommendations with respect to ordinances, and I don't think any ordinances have been submitted to the board by P and Z at this time.
Well, but these are zoning changes, so yeah, they would have to, you had a public hearing, right, for the,
No, the public hearing will be at the Board of Aldermen.
I mean, but. I'm
They
sorry,
had
right, that's true,
a vote.
right,
Yeah, they had a vote.
Right. But we can't make a zoning change without a recommendation from P and Z.
Yep, that's correct,
Right.
to the
So
zoning.
they have to have,
Okay, and again, I wasn't aware of the context in which this came up, but
right.
I guess you would have to deal with those issues separately.
Well,
We
but
just-
again, if we voted and everybody voted in favor of it, it's.
Well,
Right.
if the entire code was adopted
Right.
by 6, but then the question becomes, what if it's adopted by 5, and there are individual issues within there
Then it would
that
say
are
that, way,
contrary to
right.
them?
well, but that begs the question, then what are you having the board vote on? Because the book you're giving me is a completely different terminology than their recommendation to their chapter.
Well, we
And
would
if
have
you
to
say-
spell those out.
Yeah, I'd have to carve them out of
Right.
So that we make sure that our book gets updated.
Well, no, we would vote how we're gonna vote, and then if it was a supermajority, then it would be okay. If it's not, then it would go back to the way it was before, and it would have to go back to P and Z for their recommendation or any changes, any recommendations.
Wouldn't you
or
want to
changes.
know that before you cast a vote? Where
We can
your
send it back
difference?
to them and tell them, right.
I have a question. I'm
Yes.
just a little confused. We're not changing how this reads, right? This
Well-
is how it reads currently. So didn't, planning and zoning reviewed and came up with something different, and they're proposing it to the board?
Right.
Someone said that if we wanted to make, or I think you said if we wanted to make changes to the zoning, then we would have to go
If
through P and Z.
if P and Z makes a recommendation to Board of Alderman, we have to take action.
Oh, okay.
So-
I thought, well, we're not trying
Right.
to change it, we're just.
No, and they
They
can
did.
change the zoning code
Okay.
on, they could have an issue and have a discussion and make a recommendation to the board on their own, or we could have an issue from the city and say, we want to make it mandatory the streets are 25 feet wide. We'd have to send that to P and Z, have them review it and make that recommendation back to us. But once they make a recommendation, we have to take action one way or the other.
Okay.
Right. So.
So once again, in
Right.
this issue,
So, from a planning and zoning, would you rather us just send that issue back? I mean, we may have more, but to P and Z and have them tell them what our thoughts are, that we think that, or should we just, what do you recommend?
They didn't really discuss, do you know the extent to which it looked like there was a lot of deliberation on this particular
was.
item.
Yes.
And I guess I wasn't here for all of that, but my professional opinion is that they probably wouldn't
Would
want to change their mind.
right. Yeah.
So it might be an item that the Board of Aldermen just needs to override. But I could certainly take it back to them too, on the other hand. I just don't think that, my impression is they felt pretty strongly about it.
Well, here's what I would maybe ask them, maybe the board to consider. Next meeting, at least let them know that we think that
Okay.
it addresses the concerns that they were concerned about, and unless there's something else that we're missing that they could relay to us in our final
Some more
decision.
information if
Right.
there's, okay,
How's that sound?
sure.
Okay. Is that okay? 'Cause-
better that than just have a motion right now.
yeah, I mean, well, again, if we don't take any action, it's going to stay the way it is right there.
But to address their,
Oh, you're right, because they made a recommendation. You're right.
Right.
I'm sorry. Okay.
seems to me that's the easiest thing, is to make a motion to accept the existing definition as it occurs in the code.
In a working session, though, I don't think we can take a vote.
Well, at
You
least
have enough
to
alternate
take that
meetings.
action, to keep it in there for right now. We're not approving it, we're just saying to keep it for the final draft. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm I'm watching how we're manipulating through the session type that we're having. If it's a working session and no vote is taken to work with.
Mayor
Yes.
Kelly, I don't believe a vote needs to be taken. Staff can just note the conversation and the outcome of, direction.
that's
Leave it in, take it back to P and Z, have them deliberate and
Okay.
come back with another recommendation.
All right.
We can work
That
through
will
these
work.
items
See if they're
through
willing to
that.
change or whether we're
Exactly.
just going to keep it with the original.
Amendment changes as we get ready to do full code.
Right, okay. Phew. All right.
Good.
Any other questions with respect to their current recommendations?
Tom have one.
Yes, Your Honor, I have one more.
Okay.
And that is standing by. I think it has to do with, on page 9, this is their deliberation about the Board of Alderman voting for zoning changes, conditional use permits, and conditions. And there's a policy matter that's apparently being brought to our attention. At some point in time, the Board of Alderman adopted the requirement. There's a question as to whether or not that would continue. But then that's the last I see of it there. What is that about?
Second item on page 9.
The second item there, sorry, on page 9.
One of the Planning and Zoning Commission members thought that there should not be a supermajority required for the Board of Aldermen to override a recommendation. And right now, a supermajority is required for zoning changes, text amendments, and conditional use permits. And he felt that we should defer to the Board of Aldermen and not require that supermajority. And my response was that I don't know for sure, but it's more of just a policy issue. I don't know.
State statute.
Then state statute. State statute would not require, if I remember correctly, the supermajority for the Board of Aldermen to override those types of petitions, a recommendation of P&Z. And I'm just guessing it. I mean, it is a policy matter, something that the Board of Aldermen probably decided at some point. Maybe because, and I think I put in here, because the P&Z is not a political body, or they would defer to the P&Z's expertise, something of that nature. So,
Okay. Alderman Sanders?
I think that should be removed. That was one of the changes that the state statute is, it needs to be a supermajority to overturn a negative recommendation of P&Z. So it defers to the status quo. Do you know what I mean? If they give you a negative recommendation, that's what state statute is. And again, it's an appointed body, so, there's always, politics somewhat. And I'm not trying to say that as any, but I mean, we're the ones that are accountable to the voters and the residents, and I think that we should have the ultimate say. So I definitely would like to see that policy is removed. And if state statute needs to have the 2/3 to overrule a negative recommendation, I would be in favor of that if that's what the statute requires.
So that would revert back to a simple majority.
Right, simple majority.
I'm personally fine with that. But we'd have to make that change if that was the case, Your Honor. Frank?
But that's the only thing so are you saying that if the P&Z gives us a negative recommendation, if they vote no on a proposal, that we should not have a supermajority overrule them?
No. If
In
they
that
make a
instance,
negative
yes.
recommendation, saying a conditional use because they think it doesn't meet,
Right.
the
zoning
threshold's
requirements, right.
higher to
Okay.
actually grant the use. Therefore, to overturn it, we have to have 6 votes of the
Supermajority.
board. But if they recommend a positive saying, yes, go with it, the decision still lies with us with just a majority vote. It should
that's
not
the
be
way it is.
2/3. No.
No.
conditional use,
It's
Oh,
not.
for conditional use only. Okay,
Right.
I'm sorry. I
And for
wasn't-
text amendments
And
and rezoning.
Right.
And
Okay.
it should rely with us.
I would agree with that, right.
And in this situation, I don't really feel like it's, that's where we need to find out. That was a policy thing. I mean, I don't believe it's planning and zoning's prerogative to make that decision. Do you know what I mean?
But it was in the zoning code, so they have to. If they're saying that the city, again, we can be more restrictive on certain things in the state statute. So at some point, the board asked P&Z to review that. They made a recommendation. They voted. It's in the zoning code for it to be this way. So they may have said initially it was a policy, but it's in the zoning code, so we would have to change the code in order to do that.
Well, I'd like to see the ordinance that supported that. I mean, it's,
But in the meantime,
Well,
it looks as though like P&Z was okay with us going back to what's being
Right.
proposed now.
right,
Right.
right.
And in fact, recommending it, it's I think.
Oh, okay, that okay means Mike Damings is
Yes.
okay.
Right. They're in
Making it-
favor of it,
Making it
right.
the least
No, the
restrictive.
okay means leave it as it is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no other, there
So
was-
they discussed this, but they said leave it at the, okay. So that would be another change we would have to ask them to consider.
Yeah,
And I'm not-
that's a big one for me. I don't know if you want a motion or.
Well, no,
and
again,
if I
we
could
would,
say this, I don't have the state statute in front of me. I have some vague recollections of discussing this with Sullivan. The problem is when you come into two-thirds majority with a board that consists of 8 members, which comes out to be 5 1/3, which functionally means that if you need a two-thirds majority, you need 6 votes, which is 3/4. And that may be historically where some of this came up.
Yeah, I have all the places where we say 2/3 or 3/4 so that we
Yeah.
can amend it to 6. I noted all
but
those.
you're saying in order to comply with something in state statute, we had to make it that. Is that what you're saying?
My recollection is yes.
Right.
I'd have to look at the specific state statute to compare it. And I would say this, to some degree, my preference is if we have
Stay
a
at 6.
very clearly drafted state statute, I think for purposes of, lack of confusion, following the state statute frequently makes a lot of sense. It's easier to find authority from other locations in case of a dispute.
Which the state statute will read just in overturning a negative recommendation.
And again, I don't have the state statute right in front of me. I'd have to look at it again and.
Would Stephanie have had access to the state statute? I'm confused as to why it's not.
Well, so would
here,
Sullivan.
it's actually quoted here, it's 400.570 D1 in the draft review. And it has the statute quoted, in case of disapproval, the commission shall communicate its reasons to the council, and the council by vote of not less than 2/3 of the entire membership may overrule the disapproval, and upon overruling, the council or the appropriate board may proceed except blah, blah, blah.
But is that specific to conditional use permits or questions in general?
This has
that's-
to do with conditional use permits, zoning text amendments, I believe. So this one was 400.570D.
Okay.
Yeah, that was,
In conditions, the 3.
Yeah,
Zoning,
and rezoning.
conditional use, and straight conditions.
But that's only with a negative recommendation.
yes, and that's,
Right.
so state statute is supermajority only with a negative recommendation,
To overturn it.
to overturn it. Yeah.
Now,
Yes. Alderman Lee.
all right. I get a building proposal in front of us, and zoning puts in the recommendation that they have to have 15 spaces for cars to park. Board of Alderman gets the recommendation and the whole proposal in front of us. If we want to reduce it and say, I only think that he absolutely needs 10, so I want to change this recommendation down to 10. If I take state statute, it's not a negative recommendation, so a simple majority allows me to change their 15 down to 10?
You
Or
can't-
no, I have to change it with a super?
You wouldn't be able to just because the number of required parking spaces is a matter of code.
Agreed, but we have the right to be able to override it.
No.
No, that's actually just code. It's requirement of the code,
All
not
right.
a recommendation. But
But I want to make sure, the term negative recommendation is ambiguous in my opinion. We have seen parts come to us where we have changed conditional use conditions to fit a little bit more comfortably in for the project. And I want to make sure, when we do this, is it a simple majority, or since we're changing a code, or a conditional Can I do it with a simple majority, or do I need the 6?
A positive recommendation could have conditions. That
Yes.
doesn't make it negative. That just
Okay.
makes, that's just a positive recommendation with conditions. A negative recommendation would be basically a recommendation to deny.
Correct. But if I get a positive recommendation, yes, go ahead and build this building. But I want to change one of the conditions in that proposal. Do I need a simple majority to change that condition? Or do I need a supermajority of 6 because I'm changing what planning and zoning is recommending?
Currently, that's something that a supermajority would be needed for.
Exactly.
But I guess I'd
But
defer to
today,
Frank.
we're
I don't,
using the
that's still a,
term negative recommendation.
I would say that's still something that would not, if we stayed with state statute, it wouldn't require supermajority.
Exactly.
Is
But
that-
our
am I-
city code says stay with 6. And I want to make sure that we, as the board, understand that. I'll be honest with you. You're dealing with the zoning of how this city lays out and what we do or do not permit in here. When you go to change things like this, I think it should be the supermajority to help run the consistency versus a simple majority that goes with the flow of the day. I think that's bad decision-making. And yes, it's one extra vote, but that one extra vote makes a big difference.
Makes sense at all.
Your Honor.
I have,
Alderman Saunders?
when you do, like with the conditional use permit, the example you used, I think it's a negative if you try to take away their conditions. That would require a 6 vote. But we can add, we can make it more
Yes? Thank
restrictive,
you.
and that takes a majority. Would that be correct? Like, for instance, if they recommend something like 20 parking space, well, not that, but something that is under the purview.
A condition,
of-
they have to close at 7 PM.
Right.
And someone came to the Board of Alderman and said, well, I really wanted to stay open till 9, but P&Z said I could only stay open until 7. That would be a different condition. So that would be changing a condition. And I guess I'd have to, is that what you're talking about? Like,
Yes, yeah.
Good
I
example.
mean, I think we need to review the state statute to be certain here.
I'm
that-
not positive, and
You know,
if that would be considered.
Yeah, but the
Adding
state
conditions
statute- right.
isn't a negative, adding conditions isn't a negative recommendation, but
We-
changing a condition, I think, would still be a simple majority under state statute, I think, but I'd be probably to
Right,
check
the
with Frank.
recommendation comes to the board. The board for conditional use permit is going to have a public hearing that
Right.
day for that. And any of the changes that may be made, say change the time, that can be done by the board. And under state statute, that doesn't, we can add conditions to it. And even if we took out a condition or change a condition, I don't know that that makes it a negative. It's just because the board has the ultimate say.
Right.
And so the question is whether we want it to be a supermajority, 5 votes or 6 votes.
Yes.
Your Honor.
So, Alderman Kramer.
I just want to ask Ellen about the difference between a planned development in terms of if we can change something in that versus a non-planned development petition.
That would just be a site plan. Now, if it's a planned development, in the planned development district, and it's a conditional use, then it would be a conditional use permit, which would have the component of the voting issues.
For instance,
A site
you could
plan
have-
doesn't,
Yeah, I'm
But just
sorry.
the site plan recommendation, that would be a simple majority.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. For instance, under PD, you could have, a site plan for an office building is fine, but,
Less parking spaces, for example.
but if you were putting in a bank, they would have to get a conditional use permit for the drive-up windows.
Right.
So, different uses required.
But Alderman Leahy's example, if we wanted to lower the amount of parking spaces in a PD, we could, even though the code for other zones does not allow.
Well, we'd only allow that if we had, it requires like a traffic engineer to do a study and use ULI and ITE information and that sort of thing. And that would get, and it would have to be part of the site plan approval.
Okay.
But the planning and zoning commission can make a recommendation for, based on the traffic engineer saying only 310 spaces are required, but we think 300 works. And the Board of Aldermen could say, well, no, we really think we need 310. And that would just be a simple site plan vote.
Okay.
Okay.
So where are we?
Well, no, I think it was a good discussion, but I think, what we need to look at, just to make sure is that, and I think from what Frank read, we could make that change to eliminate that. Now, again, P and Z made a recommendation to keep it the way it is.
Yes.
So we would need a supermajority to overrule that. So, but I think ultimately, these are some condition, or some things we're gonna have to do at a board meeting and actually take a vote to go which direction we wanna go so we can get a final draft drawn, right?
Your Honor, just a point of clarification. It actually, P and Z would like the ability to overrule to be as low a bar as is statutorily allowed. So they are concurring that they would like to see it.
No,
not
I think what they're
stay
saying is they discussed it, but then what Ellen says, it says okay is to leave it the way it is what the final okay over in the right
Is the okay from P and Z or is the okay from
Yes.
The okays from P and Z.
Really,
Stephanie?
the final rests with the Board of Aldermen, and we have to get it right when applying the conditional use. Do you know what I mean? So we'll be careful in our deliberations anyway.
Well, yeah, but the only issue is that we need,
Administrative.
in order to get it passed, if
5 or 6.
we don't want to put this whole document together and then have,
Oh, no, I
don't
understand.
have
I'm
a
fine with that.
supermajority in order to make it work.
Right, but I
It's-
understand why the
right.
state statute is if they come in and they say this has, absolutely no use here, and we say, well, let's throw caution to the wind and change, we throw, don't stay with the status quo, you should then have to have a supermajority, just the same as rezoning, you need a supermajority to override. But I think just to grant one.
But
it should
to
just be
change this,
simple.
we wouldn't need a supermajority for rezoning. What you're saying to change it would not require a
No,
super.
rezoning is a different issue. State statute's separate on rezoning, completely separate on rezoning. I think we need to look at the.
Oh,
state
zoning
statute.
changes, I'm sorry.
Zoning
Right,
is,
right, okay.
rezoning is a different issue.
No, you're right, Okay, all right. Any other concerns? Alderman Leahy?
Nope,
No?
none tonight.
Anybody else?
Oh,
Yes.
let me make sure. I'm sorry, I've got this. On the matrix is where we're at
Right.
now,
Yep,
right?
stay with the matrix.
Okay, they talk about the definition of group home, and that's talked about on page 3, I guess in connection with family. They suggested adding it. And then again on page 4. And the definition of group home, my notes in different order than this. Okay, the definition, well, it's not in the old code, which we know that, but there's an initial definition on page 490 of group home. And it talks about, that's state statute on that one. But then when you go to page 531, and they say at some point that they, we know we have group homes, I'm not saying anything about that, but they might want to consider different regulations, larger institutions, like they needed to do more. But then when you go to 531, group home there is already, we're determining within 2,500 feet. That, I don't know why that distance is put in there, and it continues through on page 533 2B, 538 for multi-residential, 535 for attached single. And the question, that it seems to hear that they're not really certain what exactly group home should be defined at. So how did we get to the 2,500 feet? Where did that come from?
Between other group homes, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Between locations.
between locations. I just want to know where the 2,500 feet came from.
I don't know, it's been that way for, let's see,
It's not in our old code. Group home
Yes,
isn't
it is.
in the.
the 2,500 feet?
Yeah.
It's
I think it's in our, I don't remember that changing. It's part of this recodification.
single resident. Give me a second.
Oh, I missed it then, because I thought he said that we needed to add group home. I didn't think group home was ever defined. I went back and forth. I know
Oh.
children home
Mhm.
and orphanage is in the old. I didn't see group home.
Group home is not defined in the old code. You're correct.
And so, Mike, I'm fine with adding it as far as 490, but I'm not fine with putting the restriction of 2,500 feet when we don't even know what the basis for that is.
And what page was that on again?
Which one?
The 2,500 feet.
Okay, it's on page 531.
Thank you.
The very last. It's not group
Single
home.
resident A classification, and I'm looking in the old book.
And then the same will be page 533 for single residence B, that's in section 2, and it'll be for B, residential B. And then 535 will be attached single-family residency, and 538 will be multifamily.
Yeah, I apologize. It does say, in the draft review notes, it says we inserted a new subparagraph 2, group homes with restrictions. So that was inserted as part of this.
The logic might be with the 2,500 feet. Let's say you had an area where it was already zoned, but no, that doesn't make any sense either. Again, I'm just
The
gonna think
2,500 feet.
like so that somebody couldn't get permits to build something on one site that the city didn't necessarily want, but then so they get approval for that and then buy the property next door and build the same type of facility
No, I
where
mean,
we wouldn't have.
Two residential side-by-side group homes, do you know what I mean? I would be, okay with that. I don't understand that 2,500 feet. I mean, for a new definition,
Right.
to all of a sudden be that
Right,
restrictive.
I know, I'm just trying to think what the logic might be for that.
Oh, no, I understand.
Can we look into that and
Yeah.
bring
Yes,
it
that's
back?
fine. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Let me see what else I have.
Okay.
Sorry,
That's all right.
I don't have that many on this. Okay, 7. Adopts the comprehensive, I was good with that. All right, and that was page 9, was the overturning. What is the facilities permit on page 11, 400.1940 of the matrix? Just, what is that?
This is video service providers permits or facilities permits are required when a private utility like Charter or
Oh, okay.
AT&T is laying wire in the right of way or on private property.
Okay,
We require a permit.
okay, thanks. 14, 15. Now, that's all I have as far as the matrix.
Okay. Well, that's probably actually a good stopping point at this point. I think what we're going to need to do is obviously schedule some more meetings and continue the review process. Here's what I would suggest. So if anybody has any other additional questions or concerns with respect to the matrix, because these are recommendations from P&Z or the other changes, with respect to this code, let's, within the next week, get them to Ellen so that she can get those together and take them back to P&Z for their either consideration or at least to know which direction we're going, to maybe better the rationale. The one will get a clarification on the 2,500 feet, or the entire definition for that matter. And Sullivan should be able to do that. That may have been a regular one, so.
Okay, so then I have other questions.
Good, how are you?
Not a lot, do you know what I mean? I mean, this looks like, some of them are just changing all those 3 quarters to 6 votes. Is that something that seems reasonable? You know, the attorney suggested that with the employee manual. Instead of doing 2/3 or 3/4, he said just
Right.
make it 6 votes of the board. Do you want where those are listed or not?
That would be helpful.
Okay,
Well, they should just be able to do, if we want to make
Search?
that, yeah, they should be
Well,
able
they
to
could do
search and
that
make
too.
sure that we haven't missed any and just make those changes, yeah.
I'll give them to you in
Okay.
532, 534, 536, 538, 541, 648, and 650.
Okay.
Your Honor,
Yes.
just as a point of order and reference, we've also got these Parks and Recreation and the fire. Is that, we submit those questions as well, or are we going to deliberate those that are not?
Well, if you
meeting?
could, actually, that would be better, because then we would be able to get right into it at the next meeting on those items.
Mhm.
Again, those were from staff. It should be a little bit easier planning and zoning, there's a process we have to go through, so.
To Ellen or to Bola? Those
I
To
would
me.
get those with Bola, right. So.
Copy both, so that way you get them in.
Right. One thing real quick, because of that last comment with respect to the utilities or facilities, the state's passed a bill this year that the governor just signed, very last minute, but basically took a lot of the zoning abilities with respect to municipalities in controlling cell towers within their communities. One of the major things is that the municipalities have to respond to their application, make a recommendation on the application within 120 days, which is a very tight review process for going through that process, which would mean that if we don't make a recommendation, that they get their permits. The other thing, it takes away a lot of our ability to make recommendations on different locations, types of cellular towers, the removal of old ones when they put in new ones, those kinds of things. And it was signed by the governor, but it really is limiting the amount of control that the municipalities have over those types of issues. And I think it's a huge mistake. We all want cell towers, we all want to be able to use our cell phones and so forth, but the
Where do you
governor
put 'em?
thinks, yeah, exactly. I mean, if they, could buy the piece of property at the corner of Brentwood and Litzinger and wanted to put up a huge cell tower, they could basically do it, and we would have no say over it. So the governor thinks it's going to create jobs by making that process streamlined, as he put it. But we need to be paying attention to those things when they're happening at the state level. So, okay, the next hour is to discuss the budget process. Really, this was a suggestion of staff. They really wanted to kind of let the board know the processes that they're going through in order to start putting the budget together, and so that we have some rationale and understanding. How we got there and why we need to adopt the budget at the end of the year. So I'll turn it over to Bola first, or Gina. Bola, I guess. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Multi-goals for this budget session is really to hear from the board and get a sense of what your priorities are for the coming year and what the department heads need to focus on as they begin to prepare their budget. What this document does, and you'll notice that in comparison to previous presentations that I've given, this is a little light. Don't want to bore you too much, but the second page just outlines the city's tagline, City of Warmth, and how it's about families and neighborhoods and neighborhood-oriented community. And there are 5 items that are vision statements that affirm or articulate what are of importance to our constituents: affordable housing, distinctive neighborhoods, cohesive pedestrian-friendly commercial mixed-use places, safe and efficient travel, efficient and effective government, preservation and enhancement of public and private spaces. And the next page after that identifies a list of all the core services that the departments provide. Overall, in 2014, we tend to be very conservative in terms of revenue forecast, no more than 3 to 4% growth. And I think we will continue to do so until after the point and the square are paid off. The conversation we had last year during the budget process was that once those TIFs are paid off, there will be approximately 1.8 total going to all the taxing entities, of which we will get a large share of that, and then about 800,000 from the square, of which we will also get a large share of that. But given that, putting that in perspective, we want to maintain status quo until we get to that point, and then the board could give direction on what more services, programs that the city needs to focus on. I believe last year we generated from department heads a staff of unfunded items, but even through that dialogue, it became apparent to me that for next year, we need to budget enough funds to do the comprehensive plan update. That seems to be one primary concern that I've heard that's been said. So we'd like to hear more from the board on what we need to focus on as we prepare the budget. For you, I think the next several pages outlines the beginning fund balance for 2012 actual, and all these numbers are from the CAFR. If you don't have a copy, please let me know. We can make one available too. You will notice that revenues continue to outpace expenditures. The only exception to that is under capital improvements, where we have been tapping into the reserves to fund some of our capital expenses. And when you have a robust reserve, you can do that if it is a decision that is made by the board. Also, when you look
But
at
let me clarify that. When you say you're tapping into the capital fund at this point of the year, part of that is because those expenses are coming due, but as
Right.
revenues come in throughout the year,
They should
that should be
offset that.
reimbursed.
Right. Also, we layer into the spreadsheets the fund balance policy that has been adopted by the board. And you will notice that as you go through each one of those pages for 2013 estimated, 2014 projected, those numbers are consistent. They do not change. I expect that during the budget process, as we begin to talk more with the department heads, those numbers will flesh out a little bit more. In 2014, the projected numbers, they haven't changed at all from what's in your current budget document. So we project a 3% growth for most expenses. They may come down, they may come up. It just depends on what some of the expenses that are upcoming will be. But primary focus for the board would be, starting on page 5, capital improvements. We've identified, based on our 5-year plan, what some of the expenses would be for the different departments and administration. I just want to reassure you, though, that when you look at that total expenditure in comparison to the revenue, that's a difference of almost $500,000. That's not what we're going to bring to you. So it's going to be a balanced budget that's going to match the revenues. So some of those numbers will be scaled down once we start to meet with departments and have a conversation on what is appropriate, what is the appropriate level of funding for some of these projects. Fire department, judicial department, under public works, streets and sidewalks, if you recall the community survey, one of the lower rated items was streets. And thankfully, we have that inventory report that we're following. So based on that, Jim has proposed 3 streets. 3 streets for 2014. If you look at 2015, there are additional streets. And we are trying to follow what is in that inventory report. Yes, Alderman Saunders?
Yes, I looked at that inventory report, and Park Ridge is higher and worse condition than some of the streets that are being up there. You know, not by a lot, but, so I just was kind of hoping, it's not because it's my street, but we had Londell and Manderley and Brentwood Forest done last year, and, find the numbers for the streets that are for this year. So I just kind of wanted to know how we can look at that, those streets, to see.
Well, we can always, let's see.
Well, Jim, didn't you prioritize them based on?
Some of them were prioritized by the street inventory. They are all in there, but some of them I mixed up myself because I felt different streets had different needs.
Okay. Because,
at different times. I mean, certainly.
you know, ours, like the Park Ridge,
Well,
you know, it's a
that's-
3.9. The overall rating, the condition is worse than, I think, Brentwood that's proposed next year. But especially the block between White and Pine, it says
Correct.
that those were in
I think
condition.
that's
So,
more
I mean,
of
if we
a
can do.
Cosmetic.
Cosmetic look.
Well, they rated it, you know, conditionally, as, you know what I mean, because it got the rating on Park Ridge. So anyway, maybe we can discuss that at another time.
I mean, it is
But-
clearly up to the board if you want to move some of these street projects up, then,
Just my suggestions in this order, what I felt the needs were.
Okay,
Uh,
I wanna throw this
Park-
idea out
that
there.
section of Park Ridge is a small dollar amount.
Right.
okay.
I know in Maplewood they did something similar to this. They had a third party recommend which streets. I don't want this to become aldermen fighting over which streets
Oh, no,
should
no,
be
no.
done. And,
we did have a
It
third
was
party.
Right.
That's
do
what I'm
this.
using.
All
That's
right.
the thing. I'm not
But
using.
I know the evaluation. I'm just saying let the ranking even go to the third party.
But again, I think then you take that information, and I think we have to, you know, leave a certain amount up to the expertise of our staff too, because, you know, again, as Park Ridge, it really is really more of a cosmetic issue because of, you know, the residents didn't want us to use, no, they didn't want us to use chip seal, which is really the better product for long-term maintenance, but we've gone away from that. And so the base maybe is still good and it's a cosmetic issue opposed to Brentwood that may, and I'm just using this example, takes a lot more traffic, and if you delay that another year, if it needed some maintenance, you may also then be destroying the base and some other things that then when you go to repair that, you're gonna have a much higher ticket item because you gotta do a lot more repairs than the overlay that we could have done this year. So, and those are kinds of things that I think staff is keeping track of, and sees those needs when they're out there on the streets all the time, so.
And I'm not saying it because it's my street, honestly. I read that one section for the white, the chip seal overlay, very worn, almost all worn away. Repair, seal, cracks and repairs, approach to white. Hump and potholes at transition from asphalt to concrete. It was just that one section that I was talking about. And, you know, I looked at some of the other streets, so it wasn't just based on
Well, there's a difference between the overlay and maintenance.
it's not based on
Right.
politics. I was trying to look through the ones that said, like, they're structural, like last year doing Hanley Industrial Park. Those streets they were structurally, they needed concrete pavements replaced
do
and
those every year.
slabs. So I wasn't trying to be.
And I'm just saying, it's,
That's fine.
Right,
It's just
I mean-
it's just a mention, no big deal.
So those are some of the types of directions we need as we prepare the budget so that we know what we should budget for or not, or defer, or if the board chooses,
Well, with the additional revenue we're going to get from the TIFs that are going to be paid,
right.
are going to be paid off.
2015 really is when we're
Start to see the real
budgeting the
revenue.
full year. They pay off in 2014, May and November, but we really begin to see more of it towards the end of 2014, and we'll fully budget for all of that in 2015.
This is going to be a temporary inflow, correct?
no.
No,
No.
Once it's
It'll
just
be
one, it'll be
ongoing.
constant inflow.
Okay.
As long as you keep
Those
businesses
stores
in the
there.
buildings.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think what we're saying is we really won't see the
full
real
No, I
increase
benefit.
until
get that.
2015.
right.
So, Alderman Lay.
If I may caution the board, I too am looking forward for the TIFs to getting paid off, Brentwood Square and the Point. But we just had a meeting last month where we're talking about taking that money and paying for a new rec center and those bills and borrowing it against the COP and using those funds to be able to pay those off. So before we start looking at spending that money, I want to make sure that we cover what we think we're going to obligate and that the excess funds are really there before we start loading up a wish list for a 5-year outlay to work with. I don't want to end up getting caught short because we double spent. And since we
Well, I
haven't
think-
got all of our numbers in on the
I
rec
don't
center.
know that we would be double spending.
You can't take the same beneficial revenue coming in from the TIFs being paid off. As you point out, $800,000 from Brentwood Square, of which I think we get to keep $370,000 of it. The rest of it goes to the St. Louis County.
Could be more than that.
But that's going to be a loan payment for a $4 to $7 million bond COP.
No, it wouldn't.
Well, that
But-
money's, you got to come
But
somewhere
again,
with the money.
we're not, again, yeah, you're right, but your numbers are way off, but you're
Okay.
right. And I think those are the things we have to look at as we go forward. But the things we're doing now is, and I think this is an important difference, the last time these streets were done, the city passed a bond issue.
Correct.
Back in the late 80s. They passed an $8 million bond issue that was never assessed against the residents, that the city paid for out of general revenue, that was just paid off in last year, right? 2011?
Mm-hmm.
It
And
was
2000
assessed against the residents.
No, it wasn't.
That debt service
Not,
for the general obligation?
never the entire amount. A couple of years, we may have had a nickel or something like that, but we could have been up to like 17 cents. We never assessed a full amount against the
But I mean,
residents.
what was the debt service? Like it was 11, I mean, what is that debt service?
Well, now it's gone. We
I
don't
know
have
it is, but I mean, was that for those
I think it was
bonds?
17 cents at the time. But that's not important. But the point is that in order, and then on top of that, by the time we got done with all the streets in the middle 90s, we were way over that 8 million. I think we ended up spending about 14 million. That a lot of those additional streets were done out of general revenue. So the goal was to get to this point where, with this increase in revenue, we would be able to be doing what we're doing these years today, is doing some of these streets going forward and just paying for them as we go along instead of having to borrow in order to do it. And that's why we put this street matrix together, had them rated, and then are trying to schedule some every year so that we can, again, schedule a couple $100,000 a year to overlay these streets instead of having to rebuild them, which is what we had to do last time because they hadn't been taken care of on a major scale in a long time. I mean, most of the streets in Brentwood were completely. Yeah. Good.
Just so I can clarify on that, though, when I did bring up that street, it was just a question, and I do want, though, to show, this is the report that I referenced, and there are streets that are first priority, second priority, do you know what I mean, listed like these are the ones that really need it, that aren't even on the list. So it wasn't just political, and so
There
No,
are
we're not
some,
saying that.
why don't
No,
you
no,
speak to
some-
Swim Club
all
Road,
these-
for
Like
instance?
Swim
Jim?
Club and Bond
Right,
Park.
right,
but
exactly.
They don't have
I
any
can't see
traffic.
putting them before.
Right, no, I
Park Ridge or
understand,
Manderley
right,
or-
I understand. And so that's all I just wanted to make sure, though, I wasn't just randomly picking my street. I was
Well, no,
reviewing.
and nobody said it, and I think that's why I'm saying, I've always tended to leave that
Right.
up to staff to make the recommendation, because they're the ones out there and see the needs, and again, Swim Club Road,
Right.
is only
No,
used by
I
the swim club
understand,
members,
I
so,
understand. It
right.
was just something to
So-
ask. Also, though, Alderman Kramer and myself, we went to the budget forum, the Citizen Budget Forum in Clayton, and they, made the determination every 20 years, they do that bond obligation to redo the streets. And I know you and I early on talked about it, whether, will this work? But like I say, you have to weigh. If we're going to get a little money eventually in a bond for the rec center, then we don't want to be coming for the streets or whatever. And hopefully we can continue paying them off. As far as a priority, I definitely want the comprehensive plan this year funded. I hope that can be, I would like to see that as a priority.
I just wanted to mention real quickly that the point in the square, when they do pay off, that revenue will come into us in different buckets. So
Yes.
we'll have the general fund portion, the stormwater parks portion, which would be for the rec center, and then we have the capital improvement fund portion, which is what we're kind of talking about here with the street program. So those buckets of money will be for those particular types of projects. We wouldn't be commingling that
Okay.
necessarily. So.
A bond for the rec center, how long would that go out for?
Probably 20.
20
20 years.
typically.
Okay.
It could be, you could go shorter, but typically not longer than that.
Okay. Thanks.
I know that the
But right now, our
conversation-
COP payment total is what?
About six.
I don't have that in front of us.
Don't we have a trash truck?
The capital fund portion is a little over 700,000.
And that's 8 million.
Right, yeah,
Right, and
there's
that's
8
what-
million outstanding.
Well, but don't we also have a trash truck coming up for replacement also?
But normally, now we would just pay for that. We would budget for that and pay for it.
Right, we're
Right,
now
we-
reserving for those
equipment
replacements, so the money will be in the fund when the time comes for
We
each
didn't have the
vehicle to be
ability to do that
replaced.
before.
Right.
But
We
my
now
prob-
have an equipment replacement reserve.
Understand that we have it.
Mhm.
We just replaced one truck last year.
We got a grant for that.
Yes. And we have another truck due this year. I don't know that in your reserve fund, you've put enough money in for one truck for this year out of the reserves. So,
I believe the trash truck is scheduled for 2015. I'd have to double check.
This
well,
year
all
you're
We're
not
not
four-
doing
all
a trash
four-
truck this year.
All three were purchased at the same time. If you replaced one last year, why wouldn't you replace one and two this year?
Because sometimes we try to extend it out a little bit.
Understand, but
Right.
They're
you got
used
three that were
differently.
purchased all at the same time.
Right.
The truck that's being replaced, truck 4, I believe, was replaced 8 months, maybe a year later after the first two. after we purchased the first two.
Okay,
It was purchased
Later.
later in the year.
so all right, we got 4 now. We got
No, well, we have 3 trash trucks and a pickup truck.
in a pickup truck. Okay, let's stay with just the trash. All 3 of the trash trucks were purchased at the same time.
No, we
No.
purchased 2 trash trucks, 2 25-yard trash trucks, and the pickup truck with the dump bed on it.
Okay,
And then some 8 months later, I believe we purchased a 20-yard
Right.
trash
trash
truck.
truck. And we replaced one of the first 2 trash trucks for this year's 2013.
Correct, and we replaced one, I believe, the year before.
Yeah, the year before was the grant. Last year we bought it.
2011, I
Right.
think. or-
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. Then my numbers are wrong. Thank you.
The latest one was 2012. We don't have one in 2013.
In 2013.
Alderman Kramer?
I just wanted to see if I could navigate back to what Bola mentioned on, well, it's included as part of the packet, but the page number 16. It shows the table ranking the ordering of 10 city services facilities by the Brentwood residents in percent. And that table shows the topic of streets coming in at number 8 with the second highest fair rating and the highest poor rating in the city of Brentwood in terms of the survey.
Yep.
And I guess why I wanted to point that out is to follow along with your comment, which is that the staff, we look forward to them giving us an idea of how best to rank the order of streets to be worked on. My idea is to see if we can reorient our funds to include more streets than just the ones that are apportioned here, so that we don't have to wait as long if we're financially able to do so.
I would agree.
Okay.
I agree with that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
would
I agree.
too.
I mean,
Right.
yeah, that, again, that comes back to how fast we want to build up our reserves, and I'm sure Jim would love to have more money to do more streets.
Right, we budgeted for Lawndale and Brentwood Place this year, and I threw the portion of Helen in to see if I could get in under our budgeted amount, and we did, so we got the 2 full streets, and then a portion of Helen Avenue will be done before the end of August.
This isn't necessarily related, but at one point, did you, Mayor Kelly, say that they were going to do Bridgeport? I thought you said that at a meeting, and maybe I misunderstood. It wasn't in the budget or anything,
No,
so,
not that
okay,
I'm aware of.
okay. I misunderstood.
Jim, do you see the swan circles on your radar screen?
I do, that's a huge street.
I understand.
That's.
Could be phased.
Right, and, you know, once we see what kind of pricing we're getting on asphalt, and, you know, that's obviously, you know, leans a lot on the oil prices. So, I looked at North Swan, and I'd rather do a street, do it all at once. So that would be a very large amount of money.
When you say all at once, you mean east, north, west, and south?
The whole Swan
thing?
Circle.
Good Lord. And how are
Well,
we,
less disruption, you know, to your residents. I mean, because if you come back 3 times in 3 different years, and you know, they don't like that.
how are we doing the actual work? We don't have our own equipment?
No, it's.
We would bid it out.
Bid it out.
Okay.
Don't you live on Swan, Alderman Kramer?
I do. I do.
It is in terrible shape. I will back it up.
I
on
recall in the past that we had a little partnership that worked out maybe inexpensively with Richmond Heights, where they helped us with Eager Road. I don't know if that's a way for us to maximize our budget a little bit.
I don't know where we would come into play with that.
They had one side of that street.
Right.
That's
Right.
why that partnership.
That's why they
provide
did
any
it.
I understand.
Labor, equipment, or anything like that.
I'm just searching for ways to stretch the dollar.
You know, another option, we tend to bid all these items out. It is a huge capital outlay. If the city were to buy, I think, at least 2, 3 equipment that would allow us to do more of our streets in-house. Of course, I don't know whether our employees are
We are not trained.
trained to do that,
No.
so that would be
We
the
have a
downside.
No.
Very minor, small spreader box that's 1950-ish that we
If then.
use. Yeah, we use on very limited occasions.
Your Honor, I just wanted to say, Jim's mentioning the budgeted amounts, and I see what's projected here for 2014. I hope that my other committee members and maybe other board members will take up the challenge to try to find ways to increase the number of streets that we can work on so that Jim has some more latitude. We can increase the speed at which that's done. And that's against the backdrop of what Alderman Leahy brought up, which is this rec center balloon. If we start funneling money over in that direction, we'll have less money for streets unless the timeline is adjusted so that our streets are done before we get to the outlay for the COP. I don't know.
Well, that would never happen. The streets we're going to be doing ongoing for the next 10, 15 years.
Right.
And really, it should be just an ongoing process. You know, the more money we can allocate for the streets, I think everybody would agree, the better, because you're going to, you know, one, keep them solid by doing the, doing the overlays opposed to having to rebuild them. And then it just is better for the entire community. But, you know, again, it comes down to that budget amount. And, you know, there may be some years where we can do more because we're not purchasing another piece of equipment or something. But that's what we have to evaluate every year as we go forward.
And when I submitted this 5-year plan, I doubled it from last year's with the amount of streets that we did. So.
Right. One thought that when we talked about handling industrial code, this is completely off the subject, but well, not completely, but where they're doing the new sidewalk project and they're crossing over in front of Taylor Chemical, we've repaired that one slab once, but right where they're doing the new crosswalk, that slab's all broken up.
That's right there in front of Taylor and
Right,
Ice Cream Specialties.
Right. Do you think, could you maybe potentially ask that contractor to have them replace that slab while they're there, or whatever needs to be at that intersection, so that we don't have to come tear it up later?
Sure. It's in pretty bad shape. I'm
Right.
aware of that.
And I knew that. I just having to think when I was driving through there.
With Ice Cream Specialties banking their trucks in right there, and, we opted not to do it yet. It would probably, I believe they're closed every other Saturday, so that would be something we'd have to work in and probably do on a Saturday if we did it in-house, which obviously would be a lot cheaper.
But I was wondering if, well, I know, but if I just want to make sure that we're not having to take out a piece of sidewalk that we just put in order, because they're putting in the handicap ramps and that there, so, right, so, just sorry, we need to get off topic. Okay. Alderwoman Saunders?
I just have one question about streets. When we were at that Clayton, they said that the life of a street is 20 years, and they felt like when you do mill and overlay to get it to the 20 years. If we did ours in the 80s, I mean, are we actually going to have to start replacing concrete slabs? I just don't.
There are, yeah, we've been replacing some and having
Okay.
industrial court on you lately.
Okay, so we'll
Park Ridge
actually
seems
do
to be
that
not
in
as
addition to
heavily-
mill and overlay? I mean, are they all going to be all of a sudden all cracking, you know, like were they all done at the same time? And
Well,
then
streets like Park Ridge, the concrete parts,
Mhm.
if they started to deteriorate quickly, we would probably just overlay them with asphalt.
Oh, okay,
And that's one way to bring another 10 to 12 years.
okay.
to the street.
I just didn't understand streets. Okay, thank you.
Another one of the major items that's listed on that page is vehicle replacement. For 2012, we're projecting a little over 300,000, and we will be taking a look to make sure that they're all at either their useful life or they can be extended. So those are conversations that will be ongoing where that is concerned. The other page is sewer lateral.
Paula, real quick,
I mean,
I'm sorry,
stormwater.
before you go any further, that the 2009 COP, what is in it, what's included in that again?
That's the library and the fire, the 2009.
And police department.
And the 2003 is is that new firehouse and city hall renovation?
Right.
Or yeah.
So the fire is in the 2003 and the 2009? No.
No. Fire, police department are the 2009.
2009.
So we rolled the PD into that.
Right.
It was
To lower the interest rate.
Finance.
And then the 2003 was the elevator, the work we did, the new
City
windows
Hall.
at City Hall and the library.
Okay. Thank you.
Stormwater parks improvement. In there, the first item under expenditures is stormwater improvements, this current year, we budgeted about 75,000 to fund that Deer Creek feasibility study. We're proposing that we bump that up a little bit for next year so that we can do a little bit more in terms of the recommendations that will come out of that report. The other projects that are listed under Parks and Recreation will really be determined in terms of funding level, depending on the outcome of the conversation over the community center.
I just wanted to point out at the bottom of that page, it calculates your ending capital reserve balance over the 5-year period. And when you get out to 2018, you see that you're at 4.3 million. That's including projected increases in revenue due to the point in the square. But I think I just wanted to point out that there's a little flexibility here for you in terms of the community center debt. There could be options for cash funding a portion of it, and then, debt financing a portion of it. We have some flexibility there. So I just wanted to point that out because I thought that was.
I also think the countywide park grants too could pay for a pretty good significant amount as well.
Right. So I think that's good news.
Sewer improvement funds, the activity continues to increase there, so we are looking at that and hope to bring a recommendation, or at least options for Public Works to consider in the next month or so. Jim, do you want to talk about what we're seeing where that's concerned?
Increased work with street repairs and stuff. A lot of sewers breaking underneath our streets, mostly right at the main. Increased activity with our call-ins. Those are definitely going up. And obviously people that repeatedly use the service, so that's when we go out, look, and try to assess what's going on with it.
Did they raise the cap? I mean, we're at the limit, correct, currently?
Jim, do you find that anywhere along the way since you started, are we getting to a point where you kind of catch it up, you get most of the old ones that were, maybe the newer homes? Is anything like that, or do you have any hope at any point in the future that you'll? It's a nice thought,
It would be nice.
So many homes.
Right. Most of them, most of the sewer pipes, they're 50, 70
Right.
years old. So I mean, there's bound to be problems with them.
I think last year the concern was that maybe there wasn't enough work to keep the employees busy. That's not the case.
Good. Well, you do a great job with it.
Thank you.
So I guess we'd like to hear from the board on other core service areas that we need to look at in terms of, as the department heads prepare their budget.
Well, again, your total capital budget, what you're projecting here needs, obviously, you've already said that it's going to have to be reduced by about 500,000, which what's on here. So once, you start meeting with department heads and going through that review, that'll be a big portion of the discussion, I'm sure.
Right. How do we balance that if I seem to hear that the board also wants us to look at adding more streets to next year's?
Less vehicle replacement.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yep.
And then will we consider a small COP or anything to move forward with the rec center? I hate to see, I know money is going to be the issue, that we're pushing that out 2015 just to begin doing some of the renovations. Is
To the rec center, you mean?
Isn't that what I'm understanding on this page? The citywide.
No, I would think
5-year
if we could get, well,
on that
ideally,
citywide
I think
5-year
if we were able to get some plans together
They'll move on.
and come to a decision what we're actually going to be doing in the total amount, again, either through paying some of it directly, through grants, but ultimately, if we were able to actually start some of the renovations in 2014, even if you did a COP, your first payment wouldn't be probably till late 2015. But really it comes down to what that final number is before we can even really have that discussion.
Do you see it on the, am I reading this? the
No,
five-year
it does show
plan?
in
You see, like-
2018, but that would most likely move up depending
Right.
on the
Because
conversation.
even 2015, we're just starting the duct work and, site conditions and bathroom. And then, like you say, the community center, the ice isn't until 2008 and 18 in the locker rooms. And I just think the residents will be.
Well, I don't think the ice is, I mean, that technically could wait again, but it comes down to the efficiencies of when you're doing things through that
Right,
construction
right.
project. The one thing that really can't wait is a roof. So,
The projects that are listed that are to be funded, that you're working on, are not on here at all.
right.
Okay.
So if you look at, down at the bottom, ending capital reserve balance,
Uh-huh.
that is the money that you have available to fund those projects. So
Oh,
at the end
okay.
of 2014, we project 2.1 million. You could use that to either start your COP debt service, or you could take $1 million of it and pay in cash.
And
You
start
have some
doing it.
flexibility there, but that,
But are those expenses in 2015 budgeted ones that we could either bump up and take the cash, or is that what do you see the ones that are in there?
We defer them. That's
Yeah.
what we would do.
if you choose to defer the projects that are here, these are the projects in addition to the
Oh,
ones
in
that you
addition.
are all working on
Oh, okay.
with
Okay,
the rec center plan.
okay,
These are all projects that are still
addition.
needing to be done in addition to
okay,
those.
thank you.
So we've layered those in over time, but you still have money available in your capital reserve, even if you did fund these other projects.
Okay,
And that's what I was talking about earlier. When you get to 2018, you actually will have 4.3 million there
thank you, Gina.
projected.
Mm-hmm.
All goes according to plan.
Conservatively.
Yes, and it is conservative.
Right. Rather be conservative. Okay, any other,
Well-
Tui?
So we would do a COP or we're not? I'm confused. We're going to have this large, looks like a large budget here in the capital
Well, again, I
reserve.
think we need to get that final number together before we can really have that discussion to analyze it. If it's, if it ends up being 2.5 million, we may be able to phase that in over years and pay for it. If it ends up being 5 million, then we may have to do a COP for part. And I just think we're spinning our wheels if we have that discussion before we find out what that final number is.
Okay. If we did a COP, what type of rate do you think we'd get on the bonds? Any clue?
To tell you, the 2009 COP interest rates range from 2% to 4.6%. So I would say we would be looking at something similar to that.
In this
I
environment.
would think probably on the lower side.
Right, in this environment, right.
I mean, if we're going to do it, if we could do it in the next 12 months, I think that'd be advantageous to us.
Yeah. And I would certainly hope we would be able to do that. I'm hoping that we have the numbers by the end of this year.
Okay.
Can we talk about that topic, Your Honor?
What's that?
What, I think the motion was to get a handle on the costs that are proposed. How are we doing that? And
Well, we are hiring, go ahead.
We are, we've talked to GBA, who's an on-call engineer, to help us get those numbers. What I've asked them to do is to provide those numbers to me in September, so we'd have them ready for the October 7th board meeting for discussion.
Good.
And as if I can follow up, Your Honor, GBA has given us already some estimates that we have a list of from the past. Are they going to be looking at different parameters, or are they just looking at more of a deletion of some of the items that were on the previous list?
They're looking at a list that basically we provided, which was the list that we discussed at the Board of Alderman meeting, and basically the proposal will be for design services and include budgetary construction cost estimates.
So a little bit more firmer costs than what they had before, and updated, because that was 2 years ago.
Correct.
So what wouldn't be on there is Alderman Robertson furnished us with a list of things that I guess he was hoping were going to be added into the GBA estimate that I guess we may or may not still consider. But are we getting updated costs on any other things to consider, or just the things that, I mean, what happens if we want to consider something else, we don't know how much it costs?
What, at this time, I mean, they have not provided the proposal back to me yet. They're still working on that cost. The question is, could I go back to them and say, what we'd like to do is get this cost and then maybe get a menu list of all these other items? That's something I could ask them to do. But from what I understood from the Board of Alderman meeting was we just want to know what the costs were to renovate, and then you guys were going to discuss further later on.
We need to get that cost first and then talk about additions.
The reason why I ask is I can foresee a conversation coming where we have the cost for those items, whatever that cost is. And then somebody says, or a group of us say, what if we also want to do this? Or what if we want to make this change? How much will that cost? And I'd hate to be in a position as Alderman, well, as other people have mentioned, to where we have to wait even further to find out how much something like that would cost. If they already have the figures in their spreadsheet, they've done it for us before.
So are you
understand
saying
what I'm
that we should include everything that was on the list, whether the board gave staff direction to
I'm just
pursue it or
supposing if
not?
they're an efficient company, they've got that spreadsheet on hand already. They've got the costs already. They're going to add.
That wasn't the direction that we took at the last meeting.
No, I understand.
I know.
I'm saying, what is the harm in them doing that?
Because then we'll be right back where we were 6 months ago, and we won't get anywhere, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If I may interrupt, Tom.
Yeah.
First, where you're headed with GBA, this is the firm that Mr. Robertson, and I yield to his expertise, had a lot of heartburn over how they justified their costing. So I do expect that type of discussion to happen. But Pat's right. The board meeting we just had agreed that we were going to focus just on maintaining this building and not look to expand our services or add a wish list of amenities.
I hear you.
And thus, I would really hate to send a mixed message to GBA saying, this is what I want you to do, but be prepared to have this secondary conversation. I think we need to stay focused enough to say, yes, let's get something moving, or nope, this isn't going to make it what we all want. Let's go back to the drawing board and start from scratch. But I don't think we can continue picking and choosing as we still work in the method.
Yeah.
Now, I am interested and very concerned at what those costs for maintaining this structure are going to come back at. Keith has his numbers. Pat has his numbers. The GBA book had its numbers. And yes, I would like to see how that, because that will help us make a better decision.
The reason why I bring this up is the one person who wasn't here when that vote took place was Keith.
Yes.
And Keith was the one person that has the structural and engineering ideas that many of us don't have access to or education about. He brought the questions forward for a reason. He wasn't able to advocate for them that night. He wasn't here. All I'm saying is, if, for example, he's the one who says, you guys are crazy if you don't at least include this structural something, and we haven't gotten, the same company that provided all of our numbers before could very easily have said, oh, by the way, if you want to do this, it's 3% more or something. I'm not at all asking for you guys to say, do that, because the numbers are provided. I'm saying, why not have the numbers in case you do decide to do that? To me, it's only legitimate and proper due diligence. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. But I'm sure the company has access to the spreadsheet with all the same stuff before. And once again,
but in that analysis, we and I'm sorry, Alderman Saunders, but in that analysis previously, I think the debate really came down to a certain extent, Alderman Robertson's expertise. I'm not going to speak for him because he's not here, but he had issues with GBA because they didn't agree with him on some of the things that he said were required in order for us to move forward with, and them as professionals are saying, no, those things weren't required. And so, we can have that debate again. Keith can bring those issues up, but, we don't have to make that an earthquake-proof building in order to do the maintenance and improvements to it that we need to do. Yeah. Alderman Robertson, as I remember, felt that we needed to do that. But there's just certain things that become cost prohibitive, and we would never do that. I think the gist of that was, if you're going to do that, you need to tear the building down and start over again. So if Alderman Robertson wants to bring those issues up when we have the debate, I think that's fine. But the direction at the last meeting was to proceed down this line so that we could get something to really have, you know, maybe it comes back at less than we thought and we want to add something else to it. We can always have that discussion. But until we have this base number, we're never going to get anywhere, is my
That's
opinion.
fine.
So,
That's fine.
Alderman Saunders.
Also, I think too, my understanding was the same, that we look at that list, but now we're asking GBA to do actually like really concrete numbers, correct? I mean, before they were just kind of ballpark, you know, square footage, you know, estimate 50 per, you know, whatever the standards are. But we're asking for more concrete numbers now, is that correct? And the only thing I could see is in doing that, if there was a maintenance item, not a direction in, you know, that maybe we didn't include, if GBA just would say on one particular, just a maintenance thing, like, oh, well, it would be better if you do this now because it'll be cost prohibitive later, I would be open to something like that, but not a different direction. So, but I do think that what we're asking of GBA is more time consuming and more involved than what we originally had. Is that correct, Eric?
Yes.
Okay.
I have some more questions for you.
Yes.
Gina, are we going to consider the financial software this year, or do you think we'll wait another year?
On the capital improvements fund projected 2015 column, you'll see that there under administration.
Okay, great.
That's the plan at this point.
Yeah, I guess with the internal controls and everything next
Right.
year. Okay, good, thank you. And
Is
then
it
the
true
internal
that-
controls audit, are we going to start implementing that beginning this year?
The what?
Well, the hiring the audit firm to
Oh, yeah.
start.
As soon as
That's
we-
a good question. It's on the August 5th agenda.
Okay, great.
And it will require the board to vote on allocating funds to pay for it.
Budget allocation.
Right. Do you want to add to that, or no?
Oh, I guess I would just say it'll be under your fund balance policy, so it'll require 6 votes to use fund balance if you choose to fund that project in 2013. If not, then we could put it into the 2014 budget as a new program.
Is there a possibility we could split it since we're getting towards the end, start it, and put some of the cost into each year, or?
I mean, it's a 90-day project, so if we start in December, then you would still need to allocate funds.
I mean, I think
part
it's a
of it.
priority, but like you say, we'll have to
Yeah.
discuss that at the board level, but thank
I'm
you.
just curious, I mean, would anyone not vote for that? I mean, that
No, it's fine. Yeah.
it's a financial risk not to put those things in as soon as possible. So,
agree.
I'd agree.
yeah, I'm just curious. Is there anyone who would not vote to allocate some funds for that?
I would
And
completely.
the sooner the better.
And then what
Yeah.
about the compensation survey? That RFP, have we gotten those?
No, they're still asking questions for clarification. I don't recall right off when the deadline is, but once we review those, we'll bring back a recommendation and we'll know the cost at that time. And then the board could consider whether it's something that you want to fund this year or next year as well.
And then are there any?
August 9th is the
Okay.
deadline.
August 9th, thank you. And are there any staffing needs that you've heard of, or anyone that's like a priority? I'm just curious. I mean, I know we can always use more help.
There's
but what
always
I'm-
staffing needs.
Right,
Yeah.
but is there any area where we're really shorthanded?
Well, you know, Bola and I we brought out the list from, I just happen to have it here. Last year's new programs list had some positions in planning and development, police, IT. I believe those were the priority positions at that time. So, but like Bola
But-
said, you know, 2014, we're still kind of thinking we
Right,
need to keep
maintain.
it status quo, but I think those conversations would definitely come up next year.
I just was
for
wondering, do you know
2015.
what I mean, if you saw one department that was really just getting behind, do you know what I mean? Where the-
I think that's probably across the board.
Okay.
Right. Well, but,
Okay.
you know, I think the city has to be very careful in hiring employees because it's a cost that, you know, never goes away kind of thing. And so you have to be very, very cautious in doing that. And I would, my personal opinion is that the one department that doesn't get enough voice in this is our Public Works Department. Those guys never get caught up. And we have some very talented employees down there. You know, we could be doing a lot of concrete work and those kinds of things daily if we had the manpower to do them, and which long-term could really save the city a lot of money. But we just, Jim can only do that for 6 weeks out of the summer because we don't have enough men to do those kinds of things, during those seasons. So, and I'm not saying Jim doesn't speak up, but I just know that when you see that and the amount of work that they do and how they're always playing catch up, that department is something that really could benefit from some additional employees as well. I think that's important, so.
And with that said, I mean, Jim and then Bola too, they always give me prompt service within a day. So even though they're backlogged on that, I usually send them an email, and within the day I've got a response, and they're out there correcting the problem. So I appreciate it.
I think, I was just going to say, from my perspective, what we have kind of for 2014 or for consideration is the comprehensive plan, the salary survey, and then the internal control review. So those three in themselves, I think, are going to be as much as we might be able to fund as a new program for 2014, but then in 15 we might have a little more flexibility.
You say you have those in there now?
No,
No,
they will be.
those are the ones we've heard have
Okay.
kind of risen to the surface as priorities for the board.
Gotcha.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. Well, again, the goal of this was really just to kind of, as an overview, where they're at now, and really kind of the thought processes that staff is going through as they put this together. And so, Bola will now be meeting, and Gina probably, with department heads and kind of going over, taking it from what we'd really like to have to what we can really have kind of thing as we go forward, and then, bring those back to us. So, I thought it was a good meeting. So, Lee?
I don't recall doing this before. Have we done this type of thing before?
No, not a pre-meeting like this, no, Gina.
We did last year's at Webster.
Right, we did.
Right, oh, wow, that.
I just
yeah.
want to say it's my first one and I enjoyed it, and I'm glad there.
We're looking for input. At this point in the process, it's always good to have input from all parties. And as you know, we're going to have citizen input on our August 29th meeting, Ways and Means. So once we get all of that input, then we have better data to use to put your budget together for you. And that's our goal with this. And, so we value your input.
While we're here, and I think we have all of Ways and Means here, that meeting's scheduled for 4:30, the citizen comment. Do you think there's any way to structure that meeting where maybe we could put the citizen forum a little bit later in the evening, or?
Well, we're starting at 4:30 because I predicted we were probably going to be here for a little while. So I would envision there being an opportunity for the residents to take part, perhaps in the beginning and at the end, or something like that. We'll work it out for them to take part.
Okay, well, maybe we can discuss it a little bit. I'll put out an email, kind of giving the parameters. Thank you.
Okay, well, if nobody has any other questions, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.